In this crazy world, it's so hard to unwind. So I'm taking time just for me. Gonna find my peace, let my soul be free. In the quiet moments, that's where I'll find a little room to breathe, leave it all behind. Give me room to breathe, I need some time to heal my heart, to clear my mind. Gonna love myself, yeah, I believe in the power of me. Just give me room to breathe.
Great new day to all my self-care friends and family. Welcome back to another Room to Breathe podcast. I am your host, Life Coach 614, and I am so happy that you've made space to be here with us today. Now, before we jump into today's episode, do me a quick favor. If you're feeling the vibe, go ahead and show us some love. Tap the screen, like, comment, but most importantly, I would love for you to share this out with someone who could use a little healing energy today. And if this is your first time here, or you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that follow button. Subscribe to our channel so that way you're always tapped in when a new episode drops. I also want to personally invite you to check out our digital home at the selfcareclub.org, where you will find everything you need from affirmative apparel to motivational merch, as well as a ton of free resources to help nourish your growth and remind you that you are supported every step of the way. Just know that you don't have to do this alone. We are healing in community, growing one breath, one moment, one day at a time. So today, I encourage you to give yourself permission to pause, to make space for peace, for growth, but most importantly for you. And remember, if anything in today's episode hits home, be sure to drop those green hearts in the chat. That's our community's way of saying I am healing, I am growing, and I am showing up for me. Now, let's get ready to breathe, reflect, and grow together. So, listen, family. Today's episode came from something a little unexpected, okay? Sometimes you're just exploring an idea, asking random questions, not really expecting anything deep from it, just like curiosity, right? Just kind of playing around with a thought or idea. And that's exactly what started this today. I was experimenting with one of those prompts where you ask ChatGPT a question and kind of see what kind of reflection comes back. Nothing serious, y'all. Just a moment of curiosity mixed with a little bit of humor. So I thought, okay? So I came across this post that said, ask ChatGPT to roast you without holding anything back. Valet, I see you. Monique, I see you. Welcome in. So again, the prompt that you put in is you just simply say, ChatGPT, roast me and hold nothing back. Now listen, y'all, let me tell y'all something, okay? When you ask for a roast, you're usually expecting jokes, right? A little playful shade, maybe a little funny observation, something light where everybody laughs and keeps it moving, right? But let me tell y'all something. I just kind of figured like it would say something funny about my schedule, or maybe mention the podcast, or maybe tease me a little bit of how many ideas that I be juggling at once, because like my brain be all over the place. But what came back wasn't just funny. I mean, it was funny, but it was accurate, okay? Like the kind of accurate that makes you laugh at first, and then like 5 seconds later, you get real quiet because you realize that something just hit you a little deeper than expected. But like underneath the humor, it really started pointing out things about my life that I think that many of us experience as we're walking in our purpose. It started listing off all kind of things to me. And, when it started listing them out one by one, I had one of those moments where you realize how something looks on the outside. And so the response that I got basically said something like, you're running a podcast, you're writing music, you're building a coaching community, you're creating courses, you're hosting guest interviews, you're designing merch, you're running a book club, you're creating daily prompts, You're launching albums, and now you've decided to add more content. And so, y'all, I had to pause for a second because I was like, hearing all of that stacked together, it really sounded like a lot. Like, I was reading this message and I started to get a bit overwhelmed. And then it said something that made me laugh like completely out loud, y'all. It said, "You're building a healing empire while the rest of us are still finishing our coffee." And I was like, wait, what just happened? You know what I mean? And so, like, I had to laugh at that because I think that sometimes, when somebody reflects your life back to you in a sentence like that, you can't help but to laugh at the accuracy. Because I hear people tell me that all the time, like, what are you building now? What are you doing next? Because I know you're doing something. You know what I mean? And so reading that, it made me realize something about purpose that we don't always talk about. Sometimes when you're walking in your purpose, people see all the things that you're doing and they assume that you're just, doing too much. They assume that you're overwhelmed. They assume that you're just trying to prove something to somebody. They even assume that you're chasing attention or recognition. But what they don't see, what they can't always see is what it feels like inside the person who is carrying the vision. Because when purpose is attached to your life, the ideas don't arrive politely, right? They don't wait their turn. They don't show up, one at a time with a checklist. They come like a flood, one idea after another. One act of obedience, opens the door to your next assignment. One conversation sparks a new direction. And before you even realize it, the thing that you thought was just one project has turned into something bigger than you originally imagined. So, today's episode isn't, really about getting roasted. It's about what the roast reveals. It's what happens when calling and creativity and compassion and community all collide in your life. And suddenly you look up and you realize that you're holding a lot, right? You're building a lot. You're dreaming a lot. You're carrying a lot. And sometimes the world looks at you and says, you're doing the most. And so, again, sometimes you just notice that you're carrying a lot. Absolutely. I'll post it. And, again, there's always that thing where sometimes like the world will just look at you and be like, you're doing the most, but today we're going to just kind of slow it down and unpack it together. We're going to use my roast as motivation. Because I think sometimes doing the most is actually alignment. Hey, Cars. Elevated Awakenings, Mr. T. Welcome in, everybody. So again, guys, sometimes doing the most is actually alignment. Sometimes doing the most is actually pressure disguised as purpose. Sometimes the real question becomes, is it purpose or is it pressure? And so that's what I want to lean into today. And so again, the whole thing that started this, or the prompt that started this all, was me asking ChatGPT to roast me, right? And I think that's what fascinates me about this whole moment is how something as simple as a prompt could create such a deep reflection. Just two simple words: roast me. Now, on the surface, that phrase sounds playful, right? Harmless. The kind of thing that, people say when they're expecting jokes and a little harmless teasing. But what it really did for me was hold up a mirror, right? And I think that sometimes mirrors show us things that we don't notice because we're too busy living our lives to step back and observe them. See, when you're in the middle of building something, when you're in the middle of showing up and creating and pouring into other people, Answering messages, recording episodes, writing lyrics, responding to community members, like all the things. You don't always stop and take inventory of everything you're carrying, right? You're just moving. You're just responding to what's in front of you. But when that response starts to list the things, right? Like for me, when it started to list all the things that I'm juggling, the music, the podcasting, the community building, the coaching, the courses, the content creation, the daily prompts, the reflective spaces, right? Like I had to laugh because I'm like, who has enough time for all that? You know what I mean? When it started stacking all of the things together like that, it really sounded like a lot. And, from the outside, it looks like 10 different projects. From the outside, I'm sure that looks overwhelming. Elevated Awakenings, Aisha, welcome back. From the outside, it might look like somebody who just keeps adding more and more to their plate. But from the inside, it doesn't always feel like chaos. Sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you guys, it just feels like obedience to me. And that's a very different experience. Like, I don't feel like I have to do it. I feel like I get to do it. Like I've been blessed to be able to do it. And, when something is placed on your heart to build, it rarely shows up neat and, in an organized timeline. Nobody sends you a message saying, okay, finish one thing, and then next year we're going to give you another idea. Because that's not how calling works. Right? When you're called to do something, ideas arrive when you're already in motion. They show up while you're still working on the last thing. They show up while you're still learning how to manage your current season. They show up when you're tired. They show up when you're unsure. They show up when you're already thinking, Lord, I'm just still trying to figure out that last assignment. And yet somehow another door opens and another idea lands and another opportunity appears and another message forms in your spirit. And if you're someone who has, ever carried a vision, you know exactly what I'm saying, right? Sometimes it feels less like you're chasing ideas and more like the ideas are chasing you. Like something keeps tapping you on the shoulder saying, hey, don't forget to do this. And so you write down that note. You record that thought. You capture that lyric or you outline that episode. You start that project. Right, coach? And it's not because you're trying to prove something to somebody. It's because something inside of you can't let that idea go. And that's, when I realized something about, like from reading this roast, when purpose is active in your life, people might interpret your obedience as overdoing it. But what they don't see is the conversations that are happening behind the scenes. Those quiet moments when you're asking, am I supposed to be doing this? Is this the next step? Is this something that I'm being called to build? Because purpose rarely feels like a checklist. It feels like stewardship, right? It's like I've been handed something meaningful and I'm just trying my best to take care of it, trying my best to nurture it, trying my best to bring it to life in a way that serves other people. And so when you start to see things through that lens, the list of things that you're doing doesn't feel like chaos anymore. It starts to feel like different expressions of the same assignment, right? Different rooms in the same house. Different branches growing from the same tree. So when I saw that roast listing everything out like that, it really made me laugh. But it also reminded me of something important. Sometimes what looks like doing the most on the outside is actually somebody just responding to the calling that's placed inside of them. And, one of the things that I've learned over time is that purpose-driven people often look overwhelming to others. And it's not because we're trying to be impressive. It's not because we're trying to prove something. It's simply because purpose rarely shows up neat and in manageable, packages. It's, it doesn't come wrapped in like a single lane where everything makes sense to the outside world. Purpose is messy. It is layered. It is creative. It's emotional. Sometimes it's spiritual. And a lot of times it refuses to stay inside the box people think that it should operate in. So what happens is people start seeing pieces of your life and they start trying to categorize them. They start trying to compartmentalize, right? Like it's a waffle and they want to just pour little drops, right? So when people start seeing those pieces of your life, they can't help but to compartmentalize them. They try to make sense of it by separating everything. So it's like when people be looking at me, they like, oh, she do a podcast. Oh, she make music. Oh, she runs a community. Oh, she's a life coach. Oh, she out here creating courses. And from the outside, for many people, that can completely look like different paths, different careers, different lanes, different responsibilities. And so when somebody sees all of that happening at once, their first thought is probably, that's a lot. She doing too much. How does she keep up with all of that? But what they don't see is what it feels like inside of me, right? Because I'm the person carrying that vision. That is what God put on me to do, right? Because inside, those things don't feel separate to me. Each and every one of those tasks that I've chose to carry, it feels connected, right? It just feels like different expressions of the same heartbeat. You know, for me, the podcast is healing through conversation, right? It's creating a space where people can hear, can hear truth and reflections and accountability and encouragement all at the same time. The music is healing through emotion and storytelling. Sometimes there are feelings that words alone can't hold, but when the music carries the message, it reaches people in a different way. The community is healing through connection because a lot of people are navigating life feeling isolated and misunderstood, or like they're the only ones going through what they're going through. But when people come together and gather in a space where honesty and growth are welcome, something powerful happens, right? People start to realize that they're not alone. And then there's the coaching, right? That's healing through guidance. That's walking with someone as they unpack patterns and build boundaries and reclaim their voice. It is walking with someone as they step into the version of themselves that is healthier and more aligned. So yeah, from the outside, I can see where things look separate and different. Podcast, music, community, coaching, content, courses. But for me, it's never felt like a bunch of random projects. It's always felt like one mission expressed in multiple forms, different tools for the same purpose, different doors leading to the same room. And that mission is simple at its core. Healing, right? Helping people breathe again. Helping people pause long enough to hear themselves again. Helping people to reconnect with parts of themselves that they had to silence to survive. Because the truth is, a lot of people were just walking around carrying invisible weight. I'm talking about stress and trauma and expectations and heartbreak and responsibilities. And sometimes what they need the most isn't another lecture about success. They need space, right? Space to reflect, space to feel, space to release, space to heal. So when I look at the podcast and the music, the community, the coaching, all of it, right? When I look at all of it together, it doesn't feel like I'm juggling 100 things. It just feels like I'm building a house and my house has many rooms. And every room exists for the same reason. So that when someone walks in carrying the weight of their life, they finally have somewhere safe to put it down and just breathe. And I think that a lot of us can resonate with carrying, the weight of being the strong one, right? Because I think that when people start seeing you, for me, I'm going to speak for myself, guys. When people start, seeing me help somebody, right? There's this shift that starts to happen. And I don't think that it's something that's always announced, right? Nobody sits down and officially assigns you the role of the strong one. But over time, people will begin to look at you differently. You become that person that people call when things fall apart, right? The one that people text when they're confused about their relationship. The one they reach out to when they're trying to make a difficult decision. The one that, they trust when life gets messy and they need a little perspective. And if I'm being honest, in many ways, that's a beautiful thing, right? Because it means that people view me as someone that they're safe with. No fear, no doubt. Welcome in, bro. Thank you for the heart, me. So it makes me feel good that people feel safe with me, right? It means that they trust my heart. And so that feels great to me. It means that, there's something about the way that I move in the world that makes other people believe that, that I may be able to help them find their way as they're navigating something difficult. But with that trust comes something else that people don't always talk about, and that's responsibility. A quiet, unspoken responsibility that comes with being the person that other people lean on. Because when people see you as the strong one, the grounded one, or the wise one, sometimes they assume that you're always okay. They assume that you've got it all figured out. They assume that you don't struggle the same way everybody else does. And what they don't always realize is that the people who hold space for others are still human too. We still have days where we feel uncertain. Days where we're tired. Days when we're carrying our own questions and emotions and responsibilities. Days where we wish that somebody would just pause long enough to ask us the same questions that we ask everybody else. How you doing today? And I mean, really, how you doing today? Because the truth is, holding space for others requires emotional energy. It requires patience. It requires presence. It requires compassion. And when you do that consistently for others, you have to be very intentional about creating spaces where you can also exhale, right? Spaces where you don't have to always have the answers. Spaces where you can just be a person, not the coach, not the mentor, right? Not the big sister or big brother, not that voice of wisdom, just a human being navigating, life just like anybody else. And that's why moments of reflection, like the one that we're talking about today, matter so much, because they give you the opportunity to step outside of your role for just a moment and just look at yourself honestly, to laugh at yourself a little, to acknowledge the weight that you're carrying, to recognize the way that you're showing up for others. And it's also to remind you that you deserve care too. You deserve rest too. You deserve support too. Because even, the person who holds space for others sometimes needs someone to hold space for them. And recognizing that doesn't make you weak. It makes you aware, more balanced. It makes you human. And sometimes I think that the healthiest thing, that the strong one can do is just pause long enough to remember that their strength doesn't mean that they have to carry everything alone. Sometimes strength simply means giving yourself permission to breathe. But again, going back to the prompt, and the whole roast me, idea, we have to understand that we can use humor as a tool for our self-awareness. One of the reasons I actually appreciated the roast is because humor has a way of softening the truth. Sometimes the things that we resist hearing become easier to process when it's wrapped in a little bit of laughter, right? Because, I mean, again, guys, let's be honest. If somebody sits you down and gives you a serious critique about your life, your first instinct might be to get defensive, right? We want to start explaining ourselves. You want to start justifying your choices, right? Protecting your ego. But when the truth shows up through humor, it's like you kind of laugh first. And in that moment of laughter, your guard drops. And suddenly you're able to hear the truth underneath the joke. And that's what happened, when the roast joked about my podcast title sounding like spiritual subpoenas. Do y'all feel like I'm handing out subpoenas every day? Like it literally said that this is not a podcast, that I be in here handing out spiritual subpoenas or something. I can't remember exactly how it was worded, y'all, but it was so funny. I will definitely post mine in the community so you guys can see exactly what it said. But it was hilarious. But listen, when I read that line, y'all, I had to laugh out loud because the more I thought about it, the more I started realizing that it might not be completely wrong. Okay, I do be stepping on y'all's toes sometimes. And think about some of the conversations that we had here. The stop babysitting grown folks brokenness, right? Or you can't heal in places that you keep pretending isn't hurting you. What about that stop asking God for signs you keep ignoring, right? So, I mean, maybe I do be handing out some subpoenas. Yeah, you have been served, okay? And listen, I know that those aren't exactly soft lullabies, but those are the kind of titles that make somebody click the episode and immediately start reevaluating their life, okay? But the truth is, those titles come from a place of honesty, right? Because sometimes healing conversations require a little bit of boldness. Sometimes people don't need another motivational quote that sounds nice. They need something to actually challenge them. Sometimes people need a question that interrupts their patterns. Something that makes them stop and think, right? Everybody could use a little unhinged coach sometimes. Because again, those are the topics that make you reflect. And I think that sometimes, humor helps us to see things from another perspective. And so again, for me, when the roast said that those titles felt like spiritual subpoenas, I started realizing that maybe that's why people connect with them, right? Because subpoenas require you to show up. They require you to face something. They require you to tell the truth. And so in many ways, that's exactly what healing requires too. Just like a subpoena, it is demanding honesty and accountability. It requires courage. But humor allows us to look at those things without shame, right? So as I read this, I didn't feel attacked. I didn't want to throw the whole computer away, right? I didn't feel like I was being scolded. Instead, it just made me curious. And I think that curiosity is powerful because curiosity opens the door to self-awareness. Instead of asking, why you coming for me like that, ChatGPT, I was like, Dad, why does this sound familiar? I swear I've heard this before, right? Instead of saying, oh, that doesn't apply to me, I just started wondering, like, where did, what parts of this might actually be true? You know what I mean? And that shift right there from defensiveness to curiosity helps the growth begin. Because when we're curious about ourselves, we're willing to explore more. We're willing to ask the deeper questions. We're willing to challenge our own patterns. And I think that that's where healing starts, right? Not in the judgment, not in the shame, but in the simple moments where we pause and say, maybe there's something here worth paying attention to. So yeah, the roast was funny, okay? But it was also a reminder that sometimes laughter is one of the most powerful tools that we have for growth. Like people always tell you, laughter is the best medicine, right? Because when truth makes us laugh, it also makes us listen. And I don't know, I think we could all use a little lightheartedness in the world, especially now with everything going on. I mean, there's a lot of heavy things happening in the world around us, but that doesn't mean that we still can't laugh a little, right? It doesn't mean that we can't find joy and happiness. But I mean, again, when I sat and looked at this roast, it just reminded me that creativity doesn't follow a schedule. And that's one thing that I wish people understood about creative purpose, is that inspiration doesn't operate on a calendar. It doesn't schedule appointments. It doesn't wait until you've cleared your to-do list. That's not how creativity works. Ideas show up when they want to show up. They arrive in waves. Sometimes you'll wake up in the morning and before your feet even touch the floor, your mind is already moving. 3 ideas before breakfast. A lyric pops into your head, while brushing your teeth. Maybe you jot down a concept for a song while making coffee, and before lunch, you're thinking of a podcast topic. Before dinner, you're outlining a conversation that could help somebody process what they're going through. And by the time the day is over, your phone looks like a bunch of notes where you've been brainstorming, 10 different topics. And from somebody else's perspective, it looks chaotic. But for somebody who lives with creative purpose, that's just how, that's just the rhythm of how inspiration moves through them. Creativity rarely travels in straight lines, just like healing, right? It's not linear. It moves like water. It flows. It spills into unexpected spaces and places. Sometimes one thought leads to another. One conversation sparks a whole new idea. One moment of reflection opens the door to something else that you didn't even know was waiting inside of you. But here's the part that people don't talk about. When your mind moves like that, when inspiration keeps showing up like that, it can also feel overwhelming because you're not just managing your time, you're managing your thoughts. You're trying to, keep up with your own imagination, trying to capture an idea before it disappears, trying to hold on to the pieces long enough to bring them to life. And if you're not careful, you start feeling like you're falling behind in your own mind. Like the ideas are moving faster than your capacity to execute them. And that's when, it's easy to start questioning yourself. And I know this firsthand. I'm literally speaking my truth. There are so many nights that I sit here and I'm like, am I doing too much? Why can't I just focus on one thing? Why do I keep getting all these ideas? But what I've learned over, time and being intentional about my healing, I've learned that creativity is not a problem. Creativity is a gift, right? It is evidence that something inside of you is still alive. It means that your mind is engaged, that your heart is engaged, that your spirit is engaged. It means that you're paying attention to the world around you. It means inspiration can find you. And not everyone experiences life in the same way. Some people struggle just to find one thing that excites them. One thing that sparks curiosity. One thing that makes them feel connected to purpose. So when ideas come in waves, instead of seeing that as chaos, what I've learned to do is to see it as something else. Just a reminder that something inside of me is still awake, still dreaming, still listening, still responding to that thing moving, my heart. And the real work isn't trying to stop those ideas from coming. Elevated Awakening, Shonda, welcome in, beautiful. It's not for me to stop the ideas from coming. The real work is learning how to steward them, right? Learning which ones are meant for right now and which ones are seeds meant for me to plant for the next season. Because not every idea needs to be built immediately, but every idea deserves to be respected. Sometimes the vision isn't overwhelming you. Sometimes it's just showing you how much possibility lives inside of you. Thank you for the heart me. But we have to understand that there is a difference between purpose and pressure. And I think that this is where the reflection got real for me. Just because you're capable of doing a lot doesn't mean you should be doing everything at once. Just because you're capable of doing a lot doesn't mean that you should be doing everything at once. And that's something that purpose-driven people have to learn the hard way sometimes, right? When you are someone who has a vision, discipline, and, a heart for helping others, opportunities just start showing up for you, like out of nowhere. Ideas start multiplying. People start reaching out. Doors start opening. And before you even realize it, your calendar is full, your mind is racing, and your energy is being pulled in 100 different directions. You are booked and busy, right? And see, the tricky part about this is that, everything might look good. Everything might even be meaningful. But meaningful doesn't always mean manageable, right? And that's where we have to start asking ourselves better questions, right? We have to understand that there's a difference between purpose and pressure. See, purpose expands you. It stretches you. It challenges you to grow. Sometimes it even scares you a little bit because it asks you to step into a version of yourself that you've never been before. But even when it's difficult, purpose is still meaningful. There's this sense of alignment that comes with it. You might be tired, but your spirit still feels fulfilled, right? You might be stretched, but your heart still feels connected to what you're building. There's this sense that what you're doing matters. Now, pressure feels very different. See, pressure exhausts you. Pressure feels heavy when you succeed. Pressure makes you feel like you're constantly trying to keep up instead of moving with intention. Pressure whispers things to you like, you have to keep going or you'll fall behind. You can't slow down because people are depending on you. You need to prove yourself. And see, the danger is that sometimes pressure can disguise itself as purpose, especially if you're someone who cares deeply about the work that you're doing. You start to believe that if you push a little harder, do a little more, give a little extra, then everything will fall into place. But over time, your body starts to tell you something completely different, right? Your mind starts feeling tired. Your joy starts to fade. And that's usually the moment where reflection becomes very necessary. Because protecting your peace isn't just about saying no to toxic people. It's also about saying no to unnecessary pressure. It's about recognizing that you're allowed to move at a sustainable pace. You're allowed to prioritize your well-being. You're allowed to take care of the person carrying the vision. Learning to tell the difference between purpose and pressure is part of maturity. It's part of self-awareness. It is part of honoring your humanity. Because again, the truth is, purpose doesn't demand you to destroy yourself to prove your devotion. Purpose invites you to grow, but it also reminds you to breathe while you're doing it. And so that's the importance of pausing, right? Something else that I've learned over time is that building requires rhythm, like a meaningful rhythm, not just effort, not just discipline, not just consistency, but a rhythm. Because when people talk about success or purpose, they often focus on the part where you're constantly producing, constantly working, constantly building, right? Thank you for the follow, Jonathan. Welcome in. Kale, Elevated Awakenings, beautiful. So again, when people talk about success or purpose, they focus on the parts where you're constantly on the go, right? But the truth is, sustainable purpose has a rhythm to it. It sounds like work, rest, create, reflect, pour, refill, right? And see, those rhythms matter because they protect both the person and the purpose. See, when we get excited about building something meaningful, it is easy for us to fall into the trap of believing that more effort always equals more impact. So we keep pushing, we keep producing, we keep pouring. And at first, that momentum feels powerful, right? You're energized by the vision. You're inspired by the possibilities. You are excited about what you're creating and who it might help. But if you stay in constant motion without allowing space for rest and reflection, then slowly things begin to shift, right? The thing that once felt inspiring starts to feel exhausting. The thing that once felt meaningful starts to feel heavy. And suddenly purpose doesn't feel like purpose anymore. It starts to feel like pressure. That's what burnout often looks like. Not lack of passion, but a lack of rhythm. Because even the most meaningful work in the world still requires space, right? Space to breathe, space to settle, space to evolve. Welcome in, Tania. And guys, think about the music for a moment, right? A song isn't powerful because every second is filled with a sound. The pauses matter too, right? The quiet moments between the notes are what allow the melody to land. And so without those pauses, it would just be noise. And we have to think about life the same way, right? Because life works that same way. Purpose works that same way. Without a rhythm, without intentional pauses, even the most meaningful work can start to feel like noise. It starts to get overwhelming. And when you start feeling that shift, when the work that you once felt energizing to you begins to drain you, the instinct for many people is to push harder, to grind more, to work longer hours, to try to outrun the exhaustion. But sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do in that moment isn't push harder. It is push pause. And pause long enough to reconnect with your why. Pause long enough to check in with yourself. Pause long enough to refill the parts of you that have been pouring into everyone else. Because the truth is, the work doesn't just need your effort, it also needs your clarity, your presence, your energy. And when you give yourself permission to rest and reflect and refill, you're not just, you're not abandoning the work. You're protecting it. Because sometimes the work itself needs room to breathe too. And when we honor that rhythm, work, rest, create, reflect, pour, refill, that, we don't just avoid a burnout. We build something that can last. All right? We build something sustainable. So when doing the most, or when you hear the phrase doing the most, stop and pause to see if that is actually alignment for you. Because again, sometimes people will look at your life and they will tell you you're doing the most. They will look at all the projects, the ideas, the movement, the growth, the conversations that you're having, the things that you're building. And their first reaction will be concern or confusion. How do you keep up with all that? Do you ever slow down? That's a lot for one person. And sometimes those questions come from a genuine place of care, because there are people who worry about your well-being, right? They want to make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself, that you're not overdoing it. Hey, Miss Laura, welcome in Elevated Awakenings. But we also have to understand that sometimes those reactions come from something else, right? It comes from perspective. Because remember, from the outside, people can only see the activity. They see the movement, they can see the results, but what they can't see is the alignment that's behind it. And that alignment changes everything. See, a few weeks back, we talked about this, how God gave you the vision. He didn't send a group chat. He gave it to you. And so when someone is walking in their purpose, something inside them shifts, right? Their energy changes. Not the frantic energy of, someone trying to prove themselves, but that focused energy of someone who is finally connected with something that matters. And when that happens, ideas begin to multiply. Opportunities begin to appear. Conversations begin to open doors. Impact, begins to ripple outward in ways that you never could imagine, in ways that you didn't even plan. And see, when that happens, it can look overwhelming from the outside. It can look like somebody doing too much. But on the inside, it feels very different. On the inside, it feels like clarity. Like the pieces of your life are finally starting to connect. Like the things that you've experienced and the lessons that you've learned and the gifts that you've developed over time are beginning to find their place. Suddenly your past starts making sense. Your struggles start making sense. The things that you went through that once felt random or painful start to reveal their purpose. And that work that you're doing doesn't feel so scattered anymore. It feels integrated. Like everything is now flowing from the same source. And that's the difference between chaos and alignment. Chaos drains you. Chaos leaves you confused about where you're going and why you're doing what you're doing. But alignment energizes you, right? Even when you're tired, you still feel connected to the work. Even when things are challenging, you still feel grounded in the mission. Even when the road isn't easy, you still feel like you're walking in the direction that you're meant to. So yeah, sometimes alignment can look like you're doing the most. Because when your gifts, your experiences, your compassion, and your purpose start moving in the same direction, momentum naturally follows. But momentum isn't the problem. Misalignment is. So when you're aligned with your purpose, the movement you create isn't chaos. It is clarity. It is intention. It's impact. So the next time somebody looks at your life and they tell you that you're doing too much, just take a moment and check in with yourself, not with their perspective, but with your own. And simply ask yourself, does this feel like pressure or does this feel like purpose? Because if it feels like purpose, what other people call too much might actually just be the visible evidence of a life that is finally moving in alignment. So when we look at this challenge, right, I took this as the mirror, the mission, and a moment for me to breathe. So again, family, this episode started with me sharing, a simple prompt that I saw trending. Just a playful challenge where you go to ChatGPT and you say, ChatGPT, roast me and hold nothing back. At first, it felt like a joke, a moment of humor, or just quick laugh, right? But what came back for me turned into something much deeper than I expected. Underneath the roast, for me, was a mirror. A mirror that reflected the way purpose can look from the outside. A podcast, music, a community, coaching, courses, conversations, ideas, a movement. And when all of those things were stacked together, it sounded overwhelming. It sounded like somebody doing the most. But the deeper reflection behind all of this is something that many of us experience when we're walking in our purpose. Because when you're building something meaningful, your life can start to look very different from the outside. Because people see the movement. They see the output. They see the projects. But what they don't always see is the heart behind it. They don't see the quiet moments when you're asking for guidance. They don't see the nights where you're reflecting on whether you're doing the right thing. They don't hear those prayers, asking God why He is calling you to do something. The moments where you're balancing inspiration and exhaustion. The moments where you're trying to protect your peace while still honoring the vision placed inside of you. And that's why this conversation matters so much. Because today wasn't really about getting roasted, right? It was about understanding something deeper about purpose-driven lives. Sometimes what looks like doing the most on the outside is actually someone responding to a calling that has been placed inside of them. But even with that calling, there are still important questions that we have to ask ourselves along the way. Are we moving with purpose? Or are we moving from pressure? Are we building with rhythm? Or are we pushing ourselves towards burnout? Are we aligned? Or are we just trying to keep up? Because remember, purpose will stretch you. It will challenge you. It should invite you to grow into a version of yourself that maybe you didn't even know existed yet. But purpose should also leave space for breathing, space for reflection, space for rest, space for being human. And maybe that's the biggest lesson hiding in all of this, right? That even the person who is building something meaningful still needs space to pause, still needs space to check in with themselves, still needs room to breathe. So if you've ever looked, at your life and thought, am I doing too much? Maybe the question isn't about how much you're doing. Maybe the question is what I'm doing aligned with who I'm becoming? Because when your life aligns with your purpose, the work may grow, the ideas may multiply, the impact may expand, but underneath all of that movement should still be something steady. Peace, clarity, meaning. But most importantly, underneath all of that, you should still have room to breathe. Now, before we head out of here, let me leave you all with a little love and light. As always, I am here to remind you to keep breathing through the highs, the lows, and every moment in between. I want you to keep choosing peace, even if it feels out of reach. And know that here at the Self-Care Club and within this Room to Breathe community, you will always be seen, always valued, and always supported. So don't ever be afraid to take up space, speak your truth, and make a little room for you to breathe. I love each and every one of you to life. And I am praying that your day is not just amazing, but aligned, intentional, and yes, on purpose, filled with purpose. I will be adding this prompt to the community. So for those of you who are not yet a part of the Room to Breathe community, I encourage you to head over to my website at selfcareclub.org or check out the link in my bio. So that way you can access the community. It is a free community open to everyone. And in there, that's where we keep these conversations going. Because again, we are healing 24/7, 365 days a year in community. So I will see you guys over there at the school community. For everyone else, we will be back tomorrow for another Room to Breathe podcast. And I hope you guys have an amazing day today. Thank you.